Well, when I was in high school, I joined the debate team. Yeah, Luann read that sentence when she was looking for pictures for the sermon and just went, well, duh. And each debate season, we would get one hypothetical question over which teams for and against, pro or con, would discuss how to support or not to support the hypothesis. Now, I have to admit, I don't remember the duo I was on doing very well or winning very often, but I do remember the importance of using logic as well as fact-based evidence to support an argument. Jesus was involved in a debate with the leader of the synagogue in which he was worshiping. Now, debate in Sabbath worship was really common. In fact, worship in the synagogue would include songs, a reading from the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures, and then debate about what the Scripture really meant. People in those days were schooled in the writings of the great rabbis, and they would use those writings to support their side of the debate. And the belief was that God's Spirit would move everyone involved in the discussion toward a greater understanding of God's truth. Now, the debate question that day was whether healing, which was considered work, could be done on the Sabbath. And that came up because during the course of the service in which Jesus was teaching, a woman who had been bent over for 18 years appeared. Now, normally, no one, especially a woman, would have interrupted a service in the synagogue. Men and women just did not worship together. And for a woman to go approach a man in public without a man escorting her, or especially to break into the men's side of the worship, was just unheard of. But Jesus was a well-known healer. Word had gotten out that he could heal people by a touch or by a word. And so this woman saw an opportunity to be cured of her infirmity. So she broke all the rules and appeared to Jesus. And Jesus immediately felt compassion and cured the woman. Now, the leader of the synagogue, a Pharisee, who believed in strictly following the laws of Moses, stood to dispute Jesus' action. The leader of the synagogue believed that healing on the Sabbath was work that could have been done on a different day. After all, God worked 6 days and rested on the 7th. What was Jesus' problem? The woman had been bent over for 18 years. She could have waited 24 hours more. But Jesus went ahead, and according to the Pharisee who was leading this, by curing the woman that day, Jesus had broken with God's desires for what should take place on the Sabbath. Now, most of us have been taught, or we have learned to believe, that Jesus was totally against the Pharisees, totally opposed, that they were at opposite ends of every spectrum, when in truth, Jesus was probably a Pharisee himself. During the 1st century, the Pharisees in the temple in Jerusalem were trying to build a wall around the laws of Moses by adding a new oral tradition. It was called a wall or a fence because the laws of Moses were here, and then to make sure everybody followed those laws, let's add some more laws. And then let's add some more. And then let's add some more. So even if you break this one, you haven't broken the law of Moses. So the Pharisees were adding another round of wall or another fence around the laws of Moses through oral tradition. It hadn't made it into writing yet, but they were saying these rules and expecting people to follow them. Now, Jesus didn't really think that that was the thing to do. But the Pharisees believed that God would send the Messiah to free them from Roman rule as soon as everybody followed God's laws. And the longer it took for the Messiah to appear, the more the Pharisees added fences or more walls to the laws of Moses. And the more rules they added, the more they tried to make sure that everybody followed the original laws of Moses. And Jesus and the leader of the synagogue were debating one of those pieces of oral tradition that, in this case, was severely limiting the amount of work that could be done on the Sabbath. Now, that means they were really debating about the role of rules and laws versus the role of compassion. Because in this case, the leader of the synagogue believed that healing and curing on the Sabbath was just unnecessary. He believed that rules were to be enforced. The woman had waited 18 years, she could wait another day. whereas Jesus believed that the woman had waited long enough. That just as donkeys and livestock were freed from their ropes to drink on the Sabbath in order to save their lives, this woman should be freed from her infirmity so that she could live her life. Jesus believed that feeding livestock while curing the woman were both necessary acts of compassion. And Jesus chose compassion over the rule and cured the woman. Now, Jesus, bless you, Jesus was not ignorant about the laws of Moses. In fact, he knew them down to the last letter, the last cross of the T and dot of the I. He knew them incredibly well. He knew the rabbinical interpretations, and he knew the oral laws that the Pharisees were trying to put into practice. And Jesus followed the laws of Moses down to the finest details. In fact, Jesus had enough knowledge that he could choose compassion over the new rules of the Pharisees every single time. The debate was rules and laws versus compassion, and that is the same debate we are having in almost every aspect of life right now. For instance, as our children, teachers, and administrators contemplate returning to school next week, teachers and administrators are already there, the debate between rules and compassion is part of everybody's thinking. When a child or a parent acts out, what is the correct response from the teacher or the administration? When a teacher or an administrator acts out, when and how should a student or a parent react? How can teachers help their students be successful while retaining some semblance of control over their classroom? Rules and laws versus compassion. Rules and laws versus compassion is the debate at the center of our denomination's argument over LGBTQ+ issues. Who gets to decide what the rules and laws will be, and which rules and laws should be enforced? Because let's get real, not all the rules and laws in our book of discipline are enforced. Right, Nancy? Right. We pick and choose. And who gets to decide which rules and laws are going to be enforced? At present, there are a lot of bishops and clergy and congregations that have decided compassion is more important than rules and laws, while other clergy, bishops, and congregations are vigorously enforcing some of the rules and laws. Now, we don't know what's going to happen. We'll wait and see what happens at General Conference in Minneapolis next May in 2020, but we don't know. Rules and laws versus compassion is the debate over immigration in this nation. Now, we would like to say that the argument is really about practical things. It's about things like food and jobs and social supports, education, health care, and money. But the real debate is between those who believe that the rules and laws must be strictly enforced and those who believe that compassion for immigrants is part of our nation's history and ethic. And our nation has usually fluctuated between the two sides depending what decade it is. Rules and laws versus compassion is the center of most of our social justice debates. And the really kind of funny part to me is we all switch sides depending on the social justice issue at hand. No one I know is strictly law and order, and no one I know is strictly compassion. Depending on the issue, we all decide where we're going to be on that issue. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. For instance, should we throw the book at young people who are caught using marijuana, or should we refer those same young people to either medical care for the condition that they are trying to medicate, or should we change the marijuana use from a misdemeanor to a ticket? Depends on your point of view, doesn't it? Should we require drug tests when someone needs financial assistance, or should we spend that same money? Got something to say or just stretching, Max? I wish it was something to say. That'd make me so happy. Oh well. Should we require drug tests when someone needs financial assistance, or should we spend money on job training, childcare, and health care? And those are just a few examples of the issues over which we debate whether we follow rules and laws or whether we act with compassion. And depending on our own history, our own personal experience, and our own opinions, most of us switch sides between rules and laws and compassion on a regular basis. Now, Jesus debated rules and laws versus compassion with his Pharisee colleagues, and he always took the side of compassion. Jesus did not believe there was any rule in the law of Moses against compassion. Yet when Jesus showed compassion, those building the fence around the laws of Moses were not happy at all. They believed that he was trying to assault the laws of Moses, when Jesus knew the laws well enough to say, I'm simply acting with compassion, the compassion that the laws of Moses allow. We live in a time when we are adding laws and rules and rules and laws as a way to build fences around our original laws, around our original ideals. And the belief is, the more we add to the rules and the laws, the happier, the safer, the more free and financially sound we, our families, our churches, and our communities will all be. Debates about laws and rules versus compassion have succeeded in turning debates into arguments, and arguments into fights, and fights based purely on emotion and opinion. We have learned to argue and to fight to the point of polarization, rather than learning how to debate with each other. Jesus never turned to emotion. Even when he was turning over the tables in the temple, he was using that as an act of debate. So when the topic of rules and laws versus compassion comes up, and frankly, most of the fights that we are currently having around immigration, taxation, use of military, and social justice issues are fights about laws and rules versus compassion, I invite all of us to first remember that we are on the same side. Jesus and the Pharisees with whom he debated were on the same side. They wanted to uphold the laws of Moses. They wanted for God's reign to rule on earth. They wanted for people to be healthy and fed and to have all of the security that God can provide. I believe that we in our church and we in our nation and we in our world are all on the same side. We have to talk some to figure out what that same side is sometimes, but I believe we all want everybody to have enough. We all want everybody to feel safe. We all want this to be a place where we can follow God's rules and God's desires for our lives, when we can be followers of Jesus by whatever name you call God or Jesus. I believe we're on the same side. It's how we get there that we fight about. And once we remember that we're on the same side, then we can begin to debate. We can use facts and we can use factual and logic to figure out how to get from where we are to the goal that we all have agreed upon. Fights are based on opinion and emotion and get us nowhere. Look at the fights between young siblings. Believe me, I watched fights between young siblings. It got them nowhere except their mother yelling at them also, which didn't help anything. But when we debate, when we realize that we're on the same side and we use facts and we use logic and we use our faith in Jesus as our Christ, we can get somewhere. And as we debate, I invite us all to remember that Jesus held absolutely true to the laws of Moses, but he saw no need to build a fence around the laws that were already in place. And when the Pharisees found fault with Jesus, it was because he chose compassion over their idea of what rules and laws ought to be. So maybe when we debate the issues of our time, we can remember that Jesus' ministry was based on one principle, and that is there is no law against compassion. Amen.